And we're on. Audra Aditi Ra, thanks for being on Fitness and Consciousness.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with your Sanskrit name. How did you get that?
Well, Aditi comes from my spiritual teacher in India. He gave me the name Ma Aditi Anand, which is like the mother creator. Aditi is the goddess who birthed the sun gods, and so she's the mother of all the gods in the Hindu pantheon. And Anand means bliss. It's a common aspect of spiritual names in India. So this woman in the women's circle communities, when I was participating in a lot of women's circles in Indianapolis, she recognized that my birth name Audra has Ra in it, which is something I had noticed too, like the Egyptian sun god. And so I had a lot of injuries going on the right side of my body, and she was like, well, you really need to own your Ra, like own your masculine. Your right side is your masculine. So she started calling me Aditi Ra. And to me, that just kind of stuck, and I thought it was really synchronous how Ra is the Egyptian sun god and Aditi is the mother of the sun gods. And so I put it together and kind of created my own spiritual name.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. That's really interesting. Now, I've known you for a while, and we've been at like a couple of the same kirtans, and I guess, how did you like get into the whole like Indian spirituality, yoga? How did you what was your introduction to that whole scene?
Well, my introduction actually came in childhood in a way. My uncle on my mom's side was really into Eastern mythology and philosophy and yoga, and I didn't really get it when I was really young. Like, he would give me these little brass statues of Hindu deities for like Christmas gifts, and I'd be like, what's this? You know, because I played flute from a young age. Like, started like 11 or 12, so he would give me little like Krishna statues, and I'd be like, I don't get this. Like, what is this? Like, I want a toy or something fun. Yeah. And then as I grew older, I grew to appreciate it more. I guess I was going through like a phase where I thought secular humanism was really cool. So I was reading a lot of Kurt Vonnegut and Carl Sagan, and so I was more on the skeptical side, and through that, I discovered synesthesia and neurology, and was really interested in like science for a while. And through that, I was like, well, how can I experience this? And what I was reading was you could experience it through a lot of like years and years of meditation or psychedelics. And I was like, I'm going to do both. And in the process, I also discovered astral projection, started reading books. My mom was also really spiritual growing up, so I found a book in her library, her personal collection about astral projection. And the stories were like too mundane to be made up. I was like, these are too like weird and boring kind of. Mm-hmm. So I believed that it was possible. I was like, well, and it said that anyone can do it. So if I could teach myself, then I would believe I could do it. So through the process of meditating and teaching myself how to astral project, I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, and kind of had some aftermath of Kundalini symptoms. And a lot of friends and family friends are recommending to try yoga, and specifically Kundalini yoga, as a way to kind of ground the chaotic symptoms I was having in my life. Yeah.
What were the symptoms? Because I've had... I like what you said, like you're reading this book and it's like too boring to not be true. And because I got into this stuff. I got my first yoga book when I was 15 at a Grateful Dead concert, 2 of them. And it was like the Krishna consciousness stuff, not like poses and things. It was like Prabhupada's, like, I'm sure you're familiar with him. But then like through like learning how like Zen meditation from my jiu-jitsu teacher from the time I was like 18, meditating with friends even before then, and like having these experiences that don't quite match up to what the book says. And like you read like all these yoga books and it looks like, well, if you want to write a yoga book, then you read these yoga books and then you write another yoga book. And it's like, you can tell that they just like wrote something that was already written before, and they don't really have much direct experience. Yeah, maybe they're practicing, maybe they're a good person and they're really trying, but a lot of times my experiences don't quite match up to what the book says. So like, what were your Kundalini, what was your experience? What were the, so you said symptoms.
Well, at first, when I first like taught myself how to astral project, along the process, there were a lot of symptoms that really freaked me out. Like I'd think that my heart was racing and I was having a heart attack, and then I'd go usually to the Google in that type of instance, and I'd find a forum where someone else had a similar experience, and they'd say, oh, it's just your heart chakra awakening. Or I'd feel my eyes darting around in my head and be like, oh no, I'm having a seizure. And I'd stop the meditation and say, oh no, you're experiencing REM. Like your mind is awake while your body's asleep. That's the state that you're getting into. So I was already kind of familiar with like witnessing a lot of this stuff so that you don't break the trance state. And I had read books about like Kundalini yoga and or Kundalini energy specifically and chakras. So when it happened, I kind of knew what was going on. It was the first time I ever like successfully astral projected and left my body, and like a fearful thought kicked in and I snapped back into my body all of a sudden. And there was this current running up and down my spine, like bouncing up and down really rapidly. It felt like really intense. It felt like there was a metal grinder like lodged inside my spine, and I was laying there paralyzed in sleep paralysis, just feeling this energy move. And I think I knew what it was. I think I knew that it was Kundalini. And eventually it did like kind of slow down and lessen in intensity, and even like it started to like tickle and just like vibrate. And it was really strong at the base of my skull, like this point. There's like this soft point kind of right at the base of the skull that's called the mouth of God in some traditions, or believed to be like the back of the third eye chakra that connects through. That was the strongest right there. So my theory, they say that there are these three knots, they're called granthis in the yoga tradition, knots of energy along the spine, and the Kundalini is supposed to pierce them in a specific order. Or else it can cause problems in your life, like psychological problems or physical problems, nervous system disorders, things like that. And so between that experience and then also later that year, through psychedelic exploration, I tried DMT because I had heard that it was the spirit molecule. And I really wanted to try that vehicle for spiritual exploration. And so between those two experiences, like I kind of had some psychological problems that took a few years to fully recover. I was in and out of what medically are determined as psychotic states, but there were a lot of visions, there were a lot of visionary experiences and kind of shamanic elements to those states as well. So, but yeah, they weren't constructive to my embodied experience in this physical plane on Earth. So I did eventually turn to yoga to learn how to ground those.
Yeah, there's like a thing, like people that like really know like spirituality, and they're like, careful what you ask for. Are you sure you want this? Because it's not always just like cool and mellow. And
yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of,
it really sucks.
If you have a lot of trauma and issues and things stored up like that, you might have to face that. They call it doing your shadow work. Which is definitely the path I've been on for several years. But both of my parents were alcoholics, and I mean there's inherent like abuse and neglect that goes along with that. But having a traumatic upbringing, I think, was definitely a part of it, and a family history of mental illness too. Which kind of goes along with mystical tendencies. And something I've been really interested in is the link thereof that doesn't always get recognized in Western society, but they're more open to exploring that in Eastern society, like the kind of like crazy mystics or the homeless wandering sadhus, are recognized as saints, even though maybe to us they'd be deemed as like psychotic or crazy. There's a connection there for sure.
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking a lot about trauma and listening to audiobooks and like one of them, like The Body Keeps the Score. I just finished that.
I love that one. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read a lot of that.
Yeah, I had my last guest was a crisis counselor, and she just happened to meet the author of that book like a couple months ago. And so I've been, I keep like running into, I guess men too, but it seems like mostly like women, like I start to like get, talk to, we'll just say like become like friends with, different women. And then like all of a sudden they'll start like telling me their story, and this like trauma stuff it's so common. It's crazy just how common it is. But maybe if we can get like some kind of spiritual lessons from it, I guess that's maybe it can be try to get as much of the positive out of that as possible, as horrible as these situations are. So when you were so you started like doing the like yoga practices, you're talking like hatha yoga because you're trying to like ground yourself, because you were like, you did the DMT and you got way out and you had the Kundalini experience and astral projecting, and so you wanted something to like ground it. So
yeah, and at first I actually started out in Kundalini yoga, which is not a very grounding practice. And after a few years, I mean, it helps somewhat because it helps direct energy through the subtle body more than anything. So it helped give a channel for some of that, and it helped. I learned so much about the philosophy of yoga through Kundalini. They get a lot more into some of the things that you might not learn from a hatha yoga class, and so I'm really grateful that I have that background and a lot of knowledge of like subtle energy and chakras and how energy works in the body from that. And then from there, though, like after a few years, I was still kind of having these problems, and I discovered Ashtanga yoga. I was in the same studio like right after my Kundalini yoga class, and I would see all these like really fit women doing these amazing things like through the window, and I'd be like, I think I want to try that. So I tried that, and it's the exact opposite of Kundalini. It's purely physical. Ashtanga is based on the 8 limbs. So there is a philosophical and spiritual side that you can get into, but in terms of showing up for a weekly class, it's just very structured. It's the exact same sequence of movements every single time. And it was originally prescribed for like young teenage men. So it's a very like masculine, yang, active, like a lot of downward dogs and vinyasa. It's the type of yoga that vinyasa yoga and power yoga is born out of. So it's very physical, very strengthening, and really helps your body get into a routine. And so I think that was more helpful than anything, was calling in aspects of routine, because routine is very grounding. And so it's strengthening. It was so physical rather than purely working on the energy body. Like Kundalini might literally be like spinning your fingers and crossing your eyes and like blowing air through your tongue and looking like a crazy person. And it's like, okay, that's fine. And that does things energetically, but you could see how that would take you further out rather than in your body.
yeah, it can be. Yeah, there is, like kind of the warning label on Kundalini yoga and opening these, like, I think it was especially like the older books, maybe it's like, be careful with this. This isn't, you don't understand until it happens. And so having that, preparing your, I guess, nervous system for, lack of a better word, I guess I think that's part of it, but not the whole story, but preparing your nervous system and your mind for this, more of what's going to happen. So this was in Indianapolis?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Although I have redeeming stories of Kundalini experience from my time in India when I studied yoga teacher training with a guru, with a spiritual teacher who is knowledgeable. And, some of these people actually, what I believe and what I've witnessed is they have the power to kind of bestow these higher spiritual experiences on their students. And And a lot of people who come to this school and other schools in India, end up having these mystical experiences. And I did as well, where through like over the course of my 2-month training, specifically, like my only job 7 days a week, all day long, was to meditate, do yoga, eat a sattvic diet, which is like a balancing yogic diet, vegetarian, and read scriptures and study yoga philosophy. So I was doing like literally the whole, like every facet of my lifestyle was a yogic ashram lifestyle. And I had classes with my teacher, really small classes. It was a pretty small school. So I got a lot of attention from the teacher, which really helped. What I experienced was energy awakening in each chakra, kind of one at a time. I could feel it rising, like in order from the base to the crown, like it's supposed to. And what that felt like was like tapping, like engines. Like if you think of like a rusty old car engine, like kicking to life, it was like that kind of feeling in my energy body. And then as it rose to my third eye, I saw rainbows of colors. I've had color in my third eye for a few years. That was a part of my healing process from what I went through. We can get into that if you want, but this was deeper. I was seeing the whole like rainbow of spectrum in my third eye. And then finally it culminated in another meditation to where I saw a bright white light above my crown. That was like a big circle, and I could just look at it. And I had my normal thoughts. I wasn't like in a deep, I don't know what they consider samadhi, where like, you're nowhere and nothing or merged with the universe. I was still here. I was still Audra. I was still in my body. I was still in the room with other students meditating, but I could also witness this white light. And when I asked my teacher what that was, he said they were glimpses into Anandamaya kosha, which is the bliss body in yoga. It's one of like the deepest levels of experience that you can achieve or have.
And so what's the like style of meditation? It's like, what are you doing when you're meditating to achieve those states? And opening the chakras, activating the chakras.
Yeah, the meditations at that school were similar to Kundalini yoga, but a lot simpler. And, they were grounded by a more of a hatha-based practice. So that particular meditation, we did, the ones that I found the most powerful, a lot of times involved a practice called Mahabandha, which is like pulling the root lock, the stomach lock, lifting the abdomen and the chin, which contains the energy within the body, and Brahma Mudra, which is turning the eyes at the third eye. So combining those two practices is really powerful. And then there's another one called Khechari Mudra, where you turn the tongue inward, and some yogis can actually drink the nectar that drips from the pineal gland using that technique. These are kind of some advanced practices. But I think in that particular one, we were combining like all three of those. And I do remember another meditation where I think it was Brahma Mudra and Khechari Mudra, and I just saw this blue spark of like fireworks go off in my third eye. So these are really powerful practices, and it's not a goal. I want to say this for listeners, that it's not always a goal to have these experiences. These are just kind of, I don't know, a bonus. Like if you get there, it's really cool, but it's not necessary, and it doesn't mean that you're not doing it right if you're not getting there. But I don't know, my teacher said it was because of some past life sadhana, some practices that I had done, that I had was probably able to access these states very easily in this lifetime.
Yeah, similar. My way I learned meditation from my jiu-jitsu teachers, like Zen meditation, you sit on your ankles. It's called seiza in Japanese, and then your hands in the cosmic mudra, and then you're running the microcosmic orbit, and your tongue is like touching the palate, like behind the teeth. Mm-hmm. You have like the locks and your chin's tucked and so it's like a lot of what I was like looking for, because I got my first yoga book when I was 15, is like the similarities. Okay, so this like Japanese guy says this Chinese guy says this. what are they saying that's the same? Okay, let's hold that. Now let's see what this Indian's talking about. And okay, these similarities, he says the same thing here, but something different. So it's like trying to like build this. Here's like what everybody agrees on pretty much. And I had this like experience you're talking about, like the teacher being able to just like bestow this energy upon you. I had a experience, and I wasn't sure if I would call it Kundalini. I've had like all kinds of things with like the lights. I'd close my eyes and it looks like fireworks, or like the Bodhi saw like scary masks kind of coming at me, like.
Oh wow!
And I'd see them like one by one when I was so just like kind of like just got to face it. That's when you said you just got to like face that stuff. That's what it reminded me of. It was just like in my over and over again. But anyways, when I used to drive a cab, and I was driving this. I don't know if I ever told you about this, but I started picking this woman up, and like her earth story, as I call it, like she was from India, and she worked at this bank, and I would take her usually to and from work pretty much every day. And as soon as she would sit in the front, and pretty much as soon as she would get in, we would talk about spiritual stuff. And she seemed to know everything, but she wasn't like preachy, and she wasn't just like reciting the Bhagavad Gita. And it was like, she just like knew it all, but she was like just so cool and easy. And she just seemed like perfect. And she just knew everything. And I was at the same time, I was practicing Qigong, and I kept reading, like, if you want to get to these high levels of spirituality, you can't drink. You can't do any kind of drugs. You can't do any of that. If you really want to know, if you really want to get there, you can't drink anymore, ever, nothing. And it's like, I was drinking like almost every day, like a beer or two a day, sometimes more, but it wasn't like I was like a bad alcoholic or anything, but not smoking weed. And so it was just over 6 years ago, July 3rd of 6 years ago. I'd been driving around for at least a couple months or so, a few months. And sometimes we'd get back to her apartment and just like sit out in the car and talk for like 20 minutes before she went in. And there was this time I dropped her off, and she was walking up to her apartment, and it's like I saw my potential, is the way that I could, not that like she was necessarily like my potential, but like it's hard to explain, but I just saw my potential, and it just like clicked that I have to be a magnet for what I want to attract. So like in like the simple case, if I want this like really amazing woman, this really amazing woman isn't probably going to want somebody that's like drinking and smoking weed every day. And so, but it wasn't like just for a woman that I wanted to do this. I wanted to like find out what's the truth behind this Qigong stuff. Is it real? What is this next level that I'm reading about? And so I went home and I had my last beer. I didn't even finish it. And I had like half a joint left, and I finished it. And then I woke up the next day, and I knocked the beer over. It was by my bed, and it smelled like a million rotten, nasty beers. Like just this half of beer spilled a little bit was just like so offensive and nasty. It's like, and I became like, I'm usually like pretty mellow and quiet. I can be around a bunch of people and not really say much. But I got super chatty. People would get in the cab, and I was just like, blah, 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 blah. And then I was just like really hyper, and I couldn't sleep, and I didn't eat anything for like 6 days. I think on the 6th day, I went to the movies with my son and had like 4 pieces of popcorn. But during that 6 days, I was just like super hyper. My energy was just going crazy. And that day that I saw her and that happened was the last day that I ever heard from her. And so it was like, she was like maybe an angel or a bodhisattva or something like that. Like if you ever see the show Touched by an Angel, like the angels, they come into town. Have you seen it?
I've seen it. I used to watch it when I was a kid. Yeah, that sounds very karmic. Like, you know, a lot of times we have these contracts with people, I believe, from from previous lifetimes or even from in between incarnations, and we kind of work out like the roles that we're going to play for each other. So it sounds to me like, you know, she played this karmic role to aid in your development, and, you know, maybe you were helping her in some way too, but once that contract was kind of completed, she played that role for you, and she, you know, her presence was no longer necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tried looking her up on Facebook, and I've tried looking her up on, and not a trace, and there was never a phone call, no text, no,
Wow.
no nothing, never heard from her again, and that was just over 6 years ago. So it was just like, she just like turned the dial, and she didn't say like, you need to quit drinking to get to be spiritual or something. She didn't say anything like that. No, it's kind of like in the movies, like where they're like walking away from the car and they click the thing and it explodes behind, big explosion behind them. It's kind of like that. She just like walked away and was like, and yeah, it was really just an amazing thing. So when you were in India, how long were you in India practicing?
Well, I traveled originally for 7 months, and then I went back to India a second time. I spent 3 months at that particular ashram, 2 months studying, 1 month teaching and volunteering. And then I traveled to other spiritual sites such as like Rishikesh, where the Beatles studied with Maharishi. And I went up to the Himalayas, to Dharamshala, where the Dalai Lama lives, and Amritsar, where the Sikhs have their golden temple. That's where Kundalini yoga originates from, the Sikh lineage. And then in the south, I went to Mysore, where Ashtanga yoga comes from. And by some random guidance, I ended up in this temple town called Tiruvannamalai, where they have this holy hill. They call it a mountain, but it's relatively small. It's called Arunachala, and it's where Ramana Maharshi had his ashram. And you know, many people believe that that mountain is an incarnation of Shiva. And it's where they walk around, they circumambulate that mountain every full moon. And it's said that, you know, by walking around this mountain one time, I forget how many years worth of karma you can burn off just by, you know, one trip around this mountain. So I ended up there for Guru Purnima, which is a powerful full moon of the Guru in India, usually like late July or early August, I believe. So that was 2015. And I had such a powerful experience there that I went back to Tiruvannamalai for a few weeks in 2016.
Yeah. Hitting all the big spots.
Yeah, I got a really good sampling, but you know, there's so many places, and India is so big. Like, you could spend multiple lifetimes exploring it and not see all of it, and even all of the temple towns and, you know, spiritual hotspots. They're just almost infinite over there.
Yeah, India is like the only other country that I really want to go to. I mean, I'd like to go to some other ones and check them out, but nothing is attractive like India. India is, for whatever reason, this completely different thing, and maybe it's because I think that they have like the map. They have a map of the mind, a map of spirituality that, like you're talking, like you said, you know, these experiences of like seeing the lights and stuff. That's cool, but that's not really it. That's just like these little things that happen along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But they understand that, so you can see that and see that what's next. So we can have these weird experiences that some people call crazy, or like you could be institutionalized for here. But there it's like, oh, okay, you had this. It's Kundalini. It's not that you're crazy. It's that this happened before you were really ready, and so we'll go back and we'll, you know, lay some better foundation for it.
Right, and they have teachers over there who can help you with that. And that's something that I feel we're really lacking in the States. And you know, for a long time, that's where I really wanted to step in and help. I don't feel that I'm fully prepared to play that role yet. Maybe at some point, but I got really interested after my experience. I got really interested in the concept of spiritual emergence and transpersonal psychology, which come from Stanislav Grof. And he and his wife, Christina Grof, founded something called the Spiritual Emergence Network, which is kind of an alternative psychology program that seeks to help people who are going through these spiritual awakening experiences, and to give them alternatives to the mainstream care. Because what I know I received and what I saw other people going through is really traumatic and, you know, really like dehumanizing. They take away people's rights, you know, and medicate them against their will. People become wards of state, and a lot of these people just need a little guidance. And a lot of these medications that they're giving people actually cause side effects that mimic psychosis. So once you're in that cycle of taking the medication, it's really hard to get out of it, because the medication can actually make you worse, not better. Yeah, but a lot of people just don't know what else to do, where else to turn. So, you know, luckily I had seen family members go through that process. I mean, not luckily for them, you know, but luckily for me, I kind of knew better. I knew that I wanted something different. You know, I had tried the medication out of desperation a few times, and I couldn't bring myself to take it long term because of the effects it was having on my body, on my psyche, on my emotional state, you know, that flatness that people get. Like, I didn't feel human. I didn't feel like me, like myself. And so I found that through yoga, through diet, through routine and meditation and all of these things, I could have a much better quality of life without losing my spark and without gaining 50 pounds in a month and all the other things that come along with those medications sometimes. But, yeah, I think it's much healthier. But it takes discipline, it takes effort. And not everybody is willing to put in the work and the inner work, because you really do, like, I think, have to face that trauma if you're not going to medicate or distract through addictions, through substances. You know, then it's important to do your inner work. And that's really the path that I've chosen.
What do you think about, like, so when somebody is at the place where you were and you're reading about Kundalini, you're reading about these higher states of consciousness and reality, and you have like years of discipline on this side, and then you have a little bit of DMT over here. Which do you recommend in retrospect? Do you recommend, yes, go ahead and do the DMT, or forget about the DMT? Because that's like, I've never done that. I've done like LSD and mushrooms, and it's been a long time since I've done those, even way longer than I even like drinking and smoking, which was 6 years ago, smoking weed. Like, so what's your thought on that now? Because it seems to be like everybody knows about it now. And
I would just say to be really careful, be really cautious, especially if you have any like family history or you know, any unresolved trauma or emotional intensity in your life. You know, a lot of people are doing these things and they're like early 20s, even late teens, like really young, and, you know, don't have the self-awareness to handle what comes up or what can be triggered. And for me, like, I didn't even have, you know, a bad experience on these states. But I'd say that it was just such a radical shift in my mindset and in my belief system so quickly that I didn't really know how to cope. Like, I felt like I understood something like so deeply that I just couldn't even convey, you know, and to try to carry that forward into the world, I just didn't know how to fit it into my previous system and worldview and way of being. You know, I didn't know how to be anymore, because what I saw was so beautiful and profound. So it doesn't even mean that I necessarily had a bad trip or bad experience, but it can still affect you. And I still wouldn't label it negative, but I would say like a profound way that can just affect your ability to be in the physical world and how you show up. So there's definitely a path of moderation, you know. I don't like to say what's right or wrong for anybody else, but just, yeah, know yourself before you get into something that intense, because substances are really intense, and, you know, plants are powerful medicine. They have a time and place, especially in shamanism. You know, usually you have somebody holding space for you. You're not going into this alone or with a random friend who's in the same exploratory path as you, or at a party or a music festival, because that's a big thing now. Like, I don't feel that these are, I don't know, I don't want to judge them as wrong, but I wouldn't say that they're as safe if you're concerned about, the psychological safety.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's the shortcut that people think it is. So it's like there's no free lunch. Like, yeah, you can see some things, but then what are you going to do with it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you going to go back to like stealing and like lying to your friends and family, or are you going to like start living like the heart-centered life where you try to become more honest and true? And are you, like, what, like, after you do it, then what? Because that's kind of how I think about it. Whereas if you're like, okay, I'm going to go on the spiritual path, I'm going to quit stealing. I never had a problem with stealing, but that just what popped up in my mind. So like, like whatever, like bad things, bad thoughts, like we take the spiritual path, and it's like, I'm going to try to leave that behind. I'm still going to be perfect. I'm still going to have impure thoughts, but what, like, like you pick the wolf in your mind that you're going to feed, the good wolf or the bad wolf. Which one are you going to feed?
Yeah.
That's kind of like where I am. Like, 'cause I haven't done DMT, but I've done LSD, and it's a teacher also. And so it's kind of hard to decide what would I have been like without that. And I got most of that out of my system in high school. I did it a bunch of times, and so it's like, yeah, I think you can learn from it, but I don't. It's not the only way to learn, and ultimately, maybe the risk of like, especially getting caught with it, like that might be one of the most dangerous things. But so that's kind of my take on it. But DMT, that is an interesting one for sure.
So something that's coming up to mention as you're talking about, substances and renouncing substances and kind of which wolf to feed or which path to choose. This is a conversation I've been having a lot lately because I've actually just embarked on a new journey of studying Tantra. And, Tantra as an aspect of yoga, they talk about, and I'm not talking about Neo-Tantra, that's different. I've studied that too. That's the more sacred sexuality branch that people associate when they hear the word Tantra, but that's not what it originally meant. In India and in ancient traditions, Tantra was referred to as primarily two paths. There's the left-handed path, the impure path, and that path includes sexuality, parched grains, which means alcohol, meats, fish, and eggs, all the things that, traditional Hinduism tells you to renounce. Well, their philosophy is to go ahead and indulge those desires and to fulfill them. Because if you're renouncing those desires and, outwardly, and you're not giving yourself permission to have these things, but you're internally obsessing about that desire, then you haven't really renounced. It's actually controlling you even more internally, and it's affecting your spiritual path. So go ahead and fulfill those desires, and you'll really quickly realize that that's not the end all be all. You'll really quickly overcome your desires. And that's the most dangerous path because, what if you get more into your desires? If you get more addicted, fulfill one, another one pops up. So, they really caution against that path. But that is a path that is recognized as viable for some people. It's a very advanced, challenging path. And then the right-handed path, sometimes that left-handed path is the red path or the impure path, or the white path is the right-handed path, which is the path we're more familiar with as yoga and meditation, and like Kundalini yoga is sometimes referred to as Kundalini Tantra because it falls under usually the white path of Tantra. White Tantra or right-handed path. So there are both ways are valid, and they both lead to the same place. And the end goal is to realize that they're all the same. It's all the same. And it's all leading to spirit and source. But yeah, and there's actually also, at least within the language of Neo-Tantra, there is a pink path, there is a middle ground. And so recognizing that in this day and age, we're all householders, we're probably not renunciates living in a cave, we're probably not living in ashrams and meditating full time, and it's not very realistic to renounce all of our desires because we have to live in this world and we have to, partake in this culture, this society that's like madness and interact with it. And so there's a way of being in the world but not of the world. And there's also kind of a middle path or pink tantra where there's a little bit of sexuality, and this is where like in neo tantra they educate a lot about relationship and the yoga of relating, which I find really valuable. That's a very, very big source of suffering for a lot of people is relationship. And yeah, recognizing that our sexual energy is our life force energy and is our Kundalini energy, and how to work with that with all of our chakras rather than only the lower or only the higher. So we can work with the lower for birthing and for manifestation, for being in the physical world and for grounding. We can work with the higher to reach up to spirit and to develop that relationship. But the way I see it, it can be really valuable to integrate all and to really like walk this world as a whole human being, and acknowledging both the shadow and the light, the density and the levity, all of the experiences, and to know how to manage that, because most of us are not on the path of like achieving enlightenment full force in this lifetime.
Yeah. So one thing we were talking about leading up to this, we were trying to get you scheduled for a long time, but it seems like you've had like this different kind of journey. I don't know how much you want to get into, if you like what you're telling me through the messages, but you moved from Indianapolis to a new community. So I'll just let you take it from there. It's like, why did you move? Because what I was telling you, like in the messages, it was like I had like something about you just like seemed different. And I didn't know you like really well, but I mean, we've talked and we've been, hanging out at the same places. And so I know you, but not well, but something seemed different. Like the pictures, like you looked, not that you didn't like look good before, but you just like all of a sudden, like something looks like it changed. Like you looked a lot better, or like happier. I don't mean that as like a backhanded compliment, but it was like there was some kind of change that I noticed. And then like what you were telling me kind of maybe made sense of that. So you want to?
Yeah. So that's a really like, there's a lot there, I guess, as to how I got to where I am as opposed to even a year ago. So this is really interesting. We're doing this, tomorrow's this partial solar eclipse, and we've had 3 eclipses in Leo in a row. I believe they were all in Leo. But anyway, last year we had that powerful eclipse in Leo in August. And that was kind of a big turning point for me. That was a big turning point for me because I was really getting this guidance to quit doing work that didn't fulfill me fully, that wasn't aligned with my purpose and my passion, and to go all in on my dreams and my passion and to see what that feels like. And it just kind of happened like after that eclipse. I was at a transformational gathering, and then I came home, and I couldn't say yes anymore to cleaning houses or babysitting or whatever I was doing to kind of compromise. I was trying to do things to like that I didn't love because it gave me more free time to focus on my business. But yeah, I think it was definitely like dimming my energy to be pulled in multiple directions, and especially taking care of children. It was really challenging. So I've quit doing that a year ago. And in that time, I've been able to really, really like do my inner work, get to know myself. I went all in on a jewelry business, actually, selling malas, meditation jewelry, and healing gemstone jewelry that's infused with Reiki. And it's been an up and down journey financially, like being a full-time entrepreneur. I definitely wouldn't say that it's fully supported me in my first year. But I've gotten so much valuable insight. I wouldn't do it any differently. But yeah, within that journey, I had just found more and more freedom, more and more joy, more and more ways to say yes to what lights me up, and to really give myself permission, kind of no matter what, to get rid of the bullshit excuses, the financial, like, oh, I can't, like, really, is that true? Or are you just not willing to risk it? Because there's a difference. And so I became willing to, like, risk it and invest in myself and empower myself and believe that I can get there faster, and that it doesn't really matter what it takes as long as I get there, because I needed to be happy in order to share, you know, like, I was coming from this place of, like, really not feeling good in myself, and it's harder to show up and serve and help others and inspire when I wasn't feeling inspired and fulfilled myself. So I really prioritized that. And through that journey, I went to all these transformational gatherings. I started sharing workshops. I started stepping into my power because I wasn't exhausted anymore. I mean, I was still exhausted. It's taken a year. Now I'm not exhausted anymore. But throughout the whole entire year, I was becoming less and less exhausted. I was overcoming chronic fatigue. I got off caffeine. I was never able to do that when I was working jobs I hated. So yeah, I've been able to really prioritize self-care and get to this place where I know what feels good and I know what doesn't. And I know more and more of what I want and how I want to show up and how I want to live my ideal lifestyle and what that feels like to have some of that. And so now, you know, we've come full circle. It's a year later. Those transformational gatherings have led me to Asheville. And, you know, to where I've been able to, I don't know if I mentioned, you know, that I was stepping into my power and sharing workshops at the gatherings, and started doing that a little bit more, and just getting more clarity on where I want to serve. So a year later, I've still been running the jewelry business. And, you know, I've reactivated my skills for photography. That actually have an art background in photography from college that I wasn't doing anything with. I just traded photography and videography to receive a Tantra practitioner training. So I'm finding ways to contribute my gifts and skills and receive. And I've also trained in women's coaching and leadership. And so I'm looking at, you know, potentially putting together a program. That's something I've dabbled into, is, you know, life coaching or some sort of spiritual empowerment mentorship for women. And I'm not sure if it's always going to be just for women, but for a while that was where I felt safest and most inspired. There's a big movement right now about, you know, feminine spirituality and feminine leadership that I feel really passionate about being a part of. So yeah, I'm at an interesting point with this eclipse season a year later, where I'm like, wow, okay, I'm finally feeling better. I'm finally feeling ready to show up and serve, and I'm ready to figure out what that needs to look like and what's next.
So do you want to talk about, like, what kind of community you're living in?
Oh yeah, I lost track of that. I moved to Asheville. So one of the gatherings, a couple of the gatherings I participated in were put on by some local residents here in Asheville, and I just felt such a strong resonance with that community. I started coming down here to visit more and more, and you know, I found that the culture here is really progressive, really open-minded. There's a really strong, close-knit community. It feels like a small town, but super fast-paced and busy, and there's so much to offer. Like weekends, especially, like this weekend, there's kirtan and like a kirtan workshop, and there's like 2 different cacao ceremonies. We have chocolate church, we have ecstatic dance church, we have like all these electronic music shows. There's a guy from Animal Collective playing tonight. That's just like regular. That's just normal. Like these highly activating things. Someone's throwing a self-care event at their house for the community to like come like give each other massages and like bring like herbs and have a spa day together, like for everyone in the community. And yeah, there's all these permaculture farms that you can go out to and do moon rituals together. I'm actually hosting a moon ritual tomorrow at the community where I live. And then one aspect that I found really empowering about Asheville is that it's really sex positive. And as I'm studying Tantra, and I'm also learning about polyamory, because there's a lot of polyamory in this community, and I find all of that really interesting, you know, kind of breaking down the societal constructs and barriers and ideas that we're kind of born into and conditioned into, the ideas of what relationship and sexuality should look like, what's acceptable, what's not. And in a community like this, I feel like I have a lot of opportunity to kind of shift that and just explore openly, like what actually feels authentic, what actually feels true beyond those layers.
Yeah, it seems like the polyamory stuff is getting more popular. I was like on a dating website, and it's like you're like swiping, and it's like there's this woman, this woman, this woman and her husband, this woman and her boyfriend, this woman, this woman, this woman, and like, you know, like reading through, and it's like polyamory, click through like poly, and it's not like a website for that. It's Bumble. It's one where like the women have to send the first message. Mm-hmm. But it was like I was on it before, and I've been on them like years ago, however long it was, and I don't remember that being so prevalent. So it's like, for me, I don't think I could like share like that. It's like I'm not like a really jealous guy, but I'm not like, I'm more of like, it's easy. I guess it's easy for me to commit. Like, even if I just start seeing someone, like have like one date. Okay, are we like going out again? Okay, well that means I'm not going to go out with anybody else. So it's like, all right, well, we just met. But if I think that there's enough potential for date 2, maybe 3, 4, 5, and see what we're going to do, I don't want to like mess it up by going out with someone else and then go out with someone, that first person, the time after that. And like, I think my thinking is maybe difficult to understand, like how, like, because it's like, yeah, it's committing at first, but it's like not commitment after like one day. Okay, like, yeah, we're going to get married now. I've known you for an hour. We're going to be married in a year. It's more like, this is worth not messing up with someone else. But then this polyamory is more like, yeah, it's cool. You can pretty much go where you want. Just be honest, or like, how does that work? Or
there's so many different ways, mostly from what I've witnessed and read about and seen, because I haven't been in a polyamorous relationship, but you know, there's so many different ways to relate, like literally anything outside of, you know, one couple. But you know, I think there is a difference between being polyamorous and being single and dating. You know, I think the common pattern for me has always been like serial monogamy, like date one person, date one person, date one person, but one at a time, even with dating. Like and here in Asheville, I've loosened that up a little bit. I've been able to, you know, maybe date one person and maybe I don't hear from them or see them for a few weeks, and I've dated other people or a few other people, like here and there, maybe one date, maybe 2 dates, and then like a month later I'm like, oh hey, like what's that person? Or we run into each other and it's like, oh hey, like do you want to hang out again? And then a second date happens, but you know, it's just organic and in the flow. And to me, that's casual, that's dating, that's being single. That's not the same as being polyamory, because I'm not in a relationship with any of those people.
Yeah.
So polyamory, and there is such thing as solo polyamory though, where like you can be single and the intention to be very open with a lot of people and multiple people, but to like always come back to yourself and not have a primary partner. Or you could have one primary partner and be open. You can have an open relationship, where you have a primary partner and maybe someone who's considered kind of like secondary, or like, you know, a third party. You can be in a triad where, you know, there's an equality between 3 people, or, you know, any multiple version of that. I've seen people raise children in those types of situations. I mean, the possibilities are infinite, but I think polyamory is, from what I understand, mostly defined as having a relationship with multiple people, or having a relationship with somebody that involves other people. And what appeals to me about that, what I find interesting about that, is the level of communication that requires, and the level of like self-work. Like, you really have to check your jealousy. You really have to check, like, wait a minute, like, is it really fair for me to project my jealousy onto that person? Is it really fair to blame them for my feelings? You know, so it really pulls back from a lot of those, what I consider codependent dynamics of like, you're responsible for how I feel. And it really takes the power back, which is healthy in any relationship. But I think, you know, it'll really bring up your stuff a lot faster if you're trying to date multiple people. And, you know, you really have to be more self-aware and more willing to own your feelings and communicate, or it's not going to work very well.
Yeah, I would, like, to me, if I think it kind of doesn't seem like it would work very well in the long run. I mean, maybe for some people it does, but like maybe at first seems like, well, this person seems really cool. You know what? She's really cool too. And hey, I'm polyamorous, you know, so, but I would always think like somebody would feel like, oh, I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go out Friday night? No, actually, I'm going out with the other girl. Oh.
And that's possible. That can come up. And I've been on dates with some people who are polyamorous or are in relationships with other people. So in that way, I've somewhat participated. And you know, and these people are very, very honest. And that's what I appreciate about them. And it's not personal. You know, I could take it personally when I don't hear from them for weeks, but I'm like, hey, this person has a primary partner. And, you know, he even apologized. He was like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I totally like kind of ghosted, like, and didn't talk to you for a while. And I was like, you don't owe me anything. You have a partner. Like, we hung out. Like, you know, like, I knew that. You told me that. Like, and, or this other guy that was, you know, just very open and free. And, you know, he was like, oh, hey, like right after we hang out, he's like, okay, like, we were at a festival, you know, we connected at a festival, and he was like, okay, like, that happened, and now, like, I don't want to be connected at the hip because I want to have freedom, and I want you to have that too, and I had plans to spend this night with another woman, and I just want you to know that ahead of time. And I'm like, okay. And then we get home, we get back to Asheville, and he lives there, and he's like, oh, hey, by the way, I'm not really available to make plans. There are a lot of people wanting my time and attention. If I see you, I see you, and, like, that's how it's going to be. And I'm like, okay, that's really honest. And then I do see him, and I like run up to say hi, and so does this other woman, and they just start making out in front of me, and I'm like, cool. I'm just gonna stand here and hold space because this is happening, you know, and to not judge it or take it personally. And, you know, clearly he has a history with this woman, and I want to get to know her. And but yeah, long story short, like he actually, like, he connected with her a lot throughout that event. Like, I noticed, and then he went home with another woman, and I went home with this friend. And as he has this other woman who, like, connects with both of these men, apparently, like sees this happening, and she's like, hey, sister, you're new in town, aren't you? I don't know you. Like, welcome. You're falling in with a good crowd. Like, these are good people. And they are. And so I really appreciate that openness and that welcomeness, like that sense of community. And, you know, I didn't have continuing relations with any of these people, but yeah, I just, like, if I were, like, I wouldn't want there to be, like, a jealousy or an energy of, like, feeling threatened by other people. And I think that it just comes from having security in yourself and learning not to take things personally. And that's the power in it.
Yeah, I like how honest it is, because I think that same thing is going on in different communities, but with a bunch of lies. Like, I had a buddy that he would, I don't hang out with him anymore, but like, he had like this really good woman, kids with her, and he would get, like, she would say, like, well, you were with this woman. He's like, no, I wasn't. And then he would tell me, he's like, man, I told her I wasn't with her. And then she gets all mad at me. But he was with that other woman. He was lying to her, and he was mad at the one for not believing his lies. He's like, I told her I wasn't with her, but you wouldn't. So it's like, at least it's like, it's so weird to somebody like trying to like argue with these like different women. And I'm like watching it like, what? This woman is good. Why don't you just like put your effort into this and make this work instead of creating all this drama?
Yeah. Well, and the first example you said, like that is just an example of poor communication and manipulation. And that is not a healthy way to approach any relationship. Because there's also a term I learned in this. So I can show you this book that I'm reading. The Ethical Slut, A Practical Guide to Polyamory, Open Relationships, and Other Adventures. And yeah, they call that out as non-consensual non-monogamy. So when somebody's pretending to be faithful to their monogamous relationship and they're not, well, you're not actually monogamous, but the other partner might not know that and didn't consent to that. So that's not really fair, but that's really common. And that's that I believe is a byproduct of our conditioning. You know, some people aren't wired to be monogamous and don't have the awareness that it's okay to function otherwise. And so we fall into these manipulative patterns. We haven't learned to consciously communicate our desires, our intentions, our boundaries, and to really own that and be okay with that. And to be okay with the other person wanting different things. And if you want different things, you need to find a different relationship. And that's, you know, that's part of it. Yeah.
It would get messy because like feelings would get hurt. Like if you're like, because then like somebody's like literally choosing someone else right in front of you. You're like, no, and then looks at somebody else, yes. So that it gets kind of real, and then like you're just there observing. So I know you're like studying it and you're like living among it, but like for me it would be like in a way it almost makes sense, because if I'm talking to a woman and like get to the part where like the communication's breaking down, where I'm saying something and she's hearing something else, she's saying something and I'm hearing, and we're just having a hard time getting along, not even necessarily arguing, but just like not quite cohesive or can't think of the word I'm looking for right now. But then to be like, okay, I'm just gonna go out with someone else, then I'm gonna leave you to get through this cycle or whatever, and then come back around but I would think ultimately it would be like maybe like some people are kind of like fooling themselves, like, yeah, I am okay with this, when maybe they're really not. Do you see that too, where somebody's like trying to be open-minded, or what they think is better open-minded, whatever it is, like, so they want to think that this is like a cool way to do things, but then they're really just hurt. So do you see that happening too, like when one woman gets chosen and not the other, or the guy tries to, or woman, like she's trying to do too much, and like too many people are like, aren't people like really getting their feelings hurt, is what I'm trying to say. Aren't people like really, because they end up really liking someone, and then they, right in front of their face, is something else is happening.
Yeah, I can't say for sure what that feels like. I mean, other than the situation where I told you, but I haven't experienced this firsthand in like more long-term dynamics. But I'm sure that's possible. And, I think again, it all comes down to communication and nonviolent communication, and, really learning how to honor and respect each other's needs, and to, I think it comes down to compassion, and having compassion, and that's part of the risk that you take, on this path. Like, you're giving up the security, definitely, of knowing like this person is committed to you. But hopefully, like the idea, you've ever heard, like, if you love something, let it go, and if it's meant to be, it'll come back. It's the idea of holding your partnership a little more loosely and allowing that freedom, because some people are going to feel really stifled by that commitment. And so saying, you know what, like I'm secure in this. I'm secure in myself. I'm willing to face being alone. I'm willing to face this loss. I'm willing to take that risk. You know, maybe this is my partner, and they're gonna meet another partner that they like more than me. And in a way, you have to kind of be okay with that. Like it's really a spiritual practice of presence, of really appreciating what is now, rather than projecting that worry into the future and knowing that it might change.
Are you, I can see better now. Yeah, it kind of.
Okay, I just had a notification come up that my internet was unstable.
Yeah, I heard everything. Like the video, like kind of like got a little glitchy, but I heard everything.
Okay.
What was I going to ask you?
I'm gonna grab water.
Okay. Something I was just thinking. Oh, nonviolent communication. I actually just got that. One of that guy's books on audio speak peace, and then I think the other one, the nonviolent communication audiobook, is ready for me at the library now. So that's an interesting way to think. I heard one of the CDs, and just that probably is a good thing. It was recommended to me, and I had kind of known about it for a long time. I'd seen the book at yoga studios and knew other people that have taken the courses in nonviolent communication, but it really seems like there is something to that, where I guess, I thought I was like resistant to it before, but I just thought like, I know how to be nice to people and say what I think, but there is probably something more to that. So, like, what do you, how many people, I wanted to ask you, how many people are in this like community? You keep mentioning the community. Is it like,
I don't know, honestly. It's really hard to gauge it. Because community, I mean, when I say community, I mean a few different things, I guess, in different contexts, but within Asheville specifically, there's a really strong sense of like-mindedness and what I would consider a spiritual community that comes together. But there are like pockets within that. There's different ways that we all connect and relate, and it's just like a tightly woven web with lots of lots of different ways that can express through like yoga or ecstatic dance, or whether that's through different meetups or rituals, or some people are more in their like witchy or like Burning Man communities, and then they all seem to like kind of overlap, and there's a sense of like everyone knowing everyone. So when I say community, I could be referring to like any aspect of that, I guess, but more so as a whole. And I really don't know like what the numbers would be, but it's just, the feeling is really, really strong here that, I could go into town, especially if there's a cool event happening, which almost every night of the week and all weekend long there is. So I can find something to go to and probably like either run into friends that I know, or I've noticed since I've moved here, I'm constantly getting messages on my phone of like, hey, what are you up to? What's going on? Like, we're always cluing each other in and making plans. It's a very like social scene and community here. And I think that's a lot of probably why I look and feel happier, because I'm so much happier with that like feeling of support, like, yeah, feeling appreciated.
Yeah, that is good to have people that like reaching out and like that want to like do similar things that you're into. It does make a difference. That was like one of my like I was talking about how when I had that experience with the woman or angel or bodhisattva or whatever she was driving the cab, like the other thing, like it was like this like a communication thing, like it's kind of like weird, but like this desire to communicate, and then like sometimes like try like reach out and like somebody's like all like toss out like a little line, and then like I sent a friend a message, and she's like it's like, oh, how are you, and stuff. I was like, and I respond like a little frustrated, but and then I like went on to say something else, and then I was expecting like oh, what are you frustrated about? But there was no She went on to talk about her, like a little bit of what she had going on, which was okay. But it's like, so sometimes people are like, if people can like pick up on like what you like really have going on, like part of the the nonviolent communication guy, so I'm like, well, what's alive in you? Like what do you have really going on? It's like when I say how are you, I don't expect you to say fine. How are you? Fine. Okay, now let's talk about.
Yeah, that's such a
hot, isn't it? The it's hot. Yeah.
Common colloquial small talk phrase that we just throw out, and we don't always mean it. Or sometimes people ask that because they really just want you to ask them in return so they can talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what it sounds like your friend was maybe doing.
Yeah. So do you have that kind of, is it that kind of communication? People are so honest about, you know, dating or seeing other people, and they're so honest about that. Do you find that they're more interested in you personally, what you have going on and what you're frustrated about, or what you really have going on in your life? Or do you find
well, I mean, all of it. Yeah, especially being new in town, and like it's, you know, a pretty close-knit community, and people notice. They're like, oh, hey, like here's somebody new. And I mean, there are a lot of new people pouring into Asheville. It's really like booming right now. And there's a lot of tourism, but especially like there's a lot of transients, and you know, people, it's a city of transplants. Like hardly anyone that lives here, at least in the spiritual community, hardly anyone that lives here is from here. Most people move here because of the community that draws them in. So that's a really interesting, I think that's also another reason people are really outgoing, because, you know, when you're living in a place that's not your hometown, like it takes a little more work to like get to know what's what and where's where and who's who. And because there's so much fresh energy coming in all the time, like there's always a sense of excitement and newness, at least for me, because I'm new here. It's interesting talking to some of the people who have lived here for like 10 or 15 years, and they have a little different perspective on it, because there's this sense of like Asheville FOMO, like fear of missing out, especially when you first get here. Like when I first got here, I was like, I can't do 5 things at once, and everything is cool, and there are like literally 5 things every single night, and how do I choose? And I have to go out every single night, and everything costs $10 or $15, and like those little bits like add up, but I want to do all of it, and how do I choose? And like talking to like my roommate who's been here 15 years, and she was like, wow, like I remember that. She's like, I haven't felt that way in years. Like she just reads the Grace books. She's like, I'm so over that. And I got over it pretty quickly too, because it's exhausting to try to do all of it. And so like I've heard that from a lot of people, like, yeah, you really catch the FOMO pretty hard at first, and then like you kind of you have to learn your balance here. And a lot of people, the city kicks a lot of people out, like pushes a lot of people out, probably because it's like so intense. Like I was talking about this with a friend who's lived here for 10 years last night, and he was like, yeah, a lot of people come here and they don't realize that by coming here, like you're going to have to face your shadows and do your inner work. And I was like, that's why I came here. I love it. I came here to do that because it's like so available and accessible here.
Yeah, it sounds like a really cool place, very interesting place, where you can kind of meet people that are like-minded and trying out new ways of thinking, new ways of living. And it seems like we are getting into like this different state of consciousness. That's part of why I have the word consciousness in the podcast title, is like it seems like it's spreading out. Like people are talking about more like weird stuff. More people know about Kundalini, and more people know about like whatever it is, like really wanting to dig into what this reality is about and what their self is about. And so it sounds like a neat place that you found it. It does seem like your vibe has changed a little bit. Not that I knew you super well before, but like I said, and then it kind of was validated by what you told me. Like something seemed different, and so I'm happy for you that you found that. And so I'm going to have to start to wrap it up. I have another one starting at 5:00. And is there anything you wanted to leave us with? You're still selling jewelry, right? So how can...
Yeah, I mean, that's still my main offering for now. Yeah, my intention is to grow that and have like a wholesale business ideally. But right now I have an Etsy shop and a website that's alchemyawake.com. You can find the Etsy shop through the links there. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, and I share a lot of my other thoughts on those platforms as well. So, if you're interested in any of these things that I'm talking about, you'll get glimpses into that if you follow me on social media. So it's a little more than just a jewelry platform. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Alchemy Awake, that's ALCHEMY AWAKE, alchemyawake.com.
Cool. Yeah, I'll include that in the your show description and stuff. The video will be on YouTube and audio on everywhere else, iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff.
Great.
So is there any other words you would like to leave us with?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I would just say that my advice to anyone in these times, especially, that we're given so much opportunity to really, we're really privileged. We really have a lot of privilege. And the best way to honor that, I think, is to really honor yourself and really find what lights you up, really find your power, take advantage of that privilege to really do something that inspires you, to do something fun and meaningful, and to get yourself out there. Even if it's not a career, even if you just want to do something on the side, especially in this world that we live in, we have so much freedom and so much ease in our lifestyles. Why not take on something that you're passionate about? Why not do something to make a difference? I think with privilege almost comes out responsibility, but it can also be really wildly fun and fulfilling and life-changing to start exploring that.
That's good advice. So thanks for being on. I'm glad we finally got you on here, and it seemed like it was the right timing. It kind of got put off over and then kind of forgot about, I guess, but I think it was good timing. So thanks again for being on, and I will talk to you for a second after I stop the recording.
Okay, thanks for having me.